Let's tackle one of the most debated myths. Spanking teaches respect. Let's look at what the research actually says about physical discipline. But before we dive in, be sure to like this video and subscribe to help spread research-backed parenting strategies. I can tell you, this is the thing that I talk about the most often, that people dislike the most when I speak about it. And they tell me that I'm misinformed, that I have no idea what I'm talking about, and that really, because I talk about spanking and I say it's ineffective, that I must be the reason why, quote, kids these days are, quote, so terrible. But let me tell you about where this myth comes from, and then let me tell you about what the research actually says. Does spanking teach respect? This myth is often linked to some cultural or religious traditions and beliefs, and different cultures have different versions of this, and different religions have different versions of this. One of the most common ones is in the Christian Bible. There is a passage that has the words, spare the rod, spoil the child. It does not just explicitly say spare the rod, spoil the child. There are other words around those words. There are other meanings to those words, all those things. And if you'd like to know more about what that passage actually means, you can check out some other videos on my channel where I talk about spanking. But for now, let's look at what the research says about spanking and if it does indeed build more respect in children. Here's what the research says. According to a study in the Journal of Family Psychology, spanking is actually correlated with increased behavioral problems. Can you believe it? I can. But this study in the Journal of Family Psychology shows that spanking is correlated with increased behavioral problems. Their study shows that spanking is linked to an increase in aggression, antisocial behavior, and mental health issues. Basically what they found is when you spank a child just sees it as you hitting them because you're angry. And no matter how you preface it, that's how a child sees it. They see it as mommy or daddy or whoever parent is hitting me because they're angry with me. And what that teaches them is that when the child gets angry enough, it's okay to hit other people. That leads to increased aggression. It also teaches them that others may also get frustrated and want to hit them. And when that happens, they just need to accept it, that that's okay. That leads to some of that antisocial behavior, either not wanting to be around people, rejecting people, or doing everything to push people away because it feels dangerous. And finally, it tells them that when someone hits you and then says that they love you, that's acceptable. For so many reasons, that is wrong, and it leads to lots of different mental health issues because it breaks what's called secure attachment. The secure attachment is how children really form their first relationships with their caregivers, and having that secure attachment helps them to build attachment and relationship with others in the future. With that mismatched thought of someone has hit me and said they love me, it makes it really difficult for children to form positive relationships, both with their caregivers and with others in the future. Another study showed some impact on brain development. This study was done by some researchers at Harvard, and they found that spanking can alter brain responses in children's brains, including an increased perception of threats. And I'll get into a little bit about what that means, but let me tell you just some about the study, and then I'll tell you what that study found. This study involved 100 who were between about 10 and 11 years old who underwent functional MRI scans. And while the children were in the functional MRI, the researchers showed them different faces of actors. Some of the faces were fearful faces or faces of aggression, and then some of the faces were neutral facial expressions. When the children were presented with the more fear-inducing faces, the children who were spanked exhibited an increased activity in areas of the brain that are associated with threat detection and emotional regulation. So threat detection and emotional regulation, more activity going off. At first, that might sound like a great thing. And as I was reading it, I was like, oh my goodness, wait, an increase in emotional regulation, that increased brain activity. But this is not a great thing. That hyperactivation actually makes children more emotionally reactive, not regulated, but more emotionally reactive and less able to regulate their emotions because their brain is constantly on high alert. Which basically means that instead of fostering self-control, spanking conditions children to struggle with emotional regulation, which makes it harder for them to calm down and process their emotions effectively, and it conditions them to overreact more to minor stressors, meaning that increased activity in the threat detection area would mean that when children see something that is either not a threat or a very small threat, they would either perceive it as a threat when there's no threat at all, or a large threat when it's a very small threat. It also showed, this study by the APA also showed that spanking may predispose children to increased anxiety, depression, and behavioral problems, as that heightened perception of threats can affect their emotional regulation and social interactions. Basically, the study breaks it down to say if you are spanking children, don't expect to spank them less. Spanking them actually is perpetuating this cycle of disruptive behavior. And if spanking is your go-to, then you'll actually end up spanking children more and more frequently the more you spank them. It also has just been demonstrated overall to not teach respect. The American Psychological Association also published an article that busts this big misconception about physical discipline. A lot of people believe it's an effective way to stop bad behaviors or get kids to comply with what parents want. But here's the truth of that article. It reported there is zero consistent scientific evidence that spanking or any form of physical discipline is likely to make kids stop unwanted behaviors or start doing the things that we want them to do, even in the short term. This research shows that physical discipline isn't better than other methods for getting positive outcomes. In fact, it often does the opposite. That same APA article reported studies have found that spanking actually predicts an increase in behavior problems over time, even after accounting for things like race and gender and socioeconomic status, which is something I hear all the time. It's, Stu, you don't know our culture, or you don't know how we raise our kids in this neighborhood, or whatever it might be. But even when all of those things are accounted for, spanking is actually shown to increase behavioral problems over time. Not only is it not helpful, it can make things worse. Spanking teaches disrespect much more than it teaches respect. Use positive discipline strategies, like even something as simple as setting clear expectations. I'm constantly baffled how few times parents just have conversations with their children about what is expected, why it's important, or just talking with them when they make a mistake. There's not even always a punishment that's necessary. And reinforce good behavior. Many times we make a huge deal out of things when children make a mistake, mess up, or make a choice that we disagree with, and then we just say nothing at all when they do the right thing or what we were wanting them to do. Reinforce that good behavior with praise and even reward sometimes. And when punishments are necessary, avoid the physical discipline. Avoid it and find other strategies that will actually be of benefit to your child. If you are learning something new today, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more research-backed strategies to support kids.